Dracula gave horror one of its most iconic figures, but cinema kept pushing the vampire far beyond capes and castles. These films turned the myth into art house seduction, surreal nightmare, raw exploitation cinema, and something far less predictable. A nearly empty seaside hotel, a troubled newlywed couple, and a mysterious aristocrat who seems far too interested in them. Daughters of Darkness builds its tension slowly, relying on charm, manipulation, and atmosphere instead of traditional horror shocks. It's hypnotic, genuinely classy horror. Picture a massive luxury resort completely deserted for the off-season. Director Harry Kumel secured the real Thermae Palace Hotel in Belgium for almost no location fees, stretching a tiny European budget to look like a multi-million-dollar picture. Delphine Seyrig even wore her own personal designer wardrobe on camera to save cash. A newlywed couple with serious relationship problems checks in. Right behind them comes a wealthy aristocrat. Instead of some creature hiding in a crypt, the threat sits across the dinner table buying them drinks. She slowly picks apart their marriage with quiet psychological games. There aren't any loud chase sequences here. The dread comes from realizing the hunter doesn't need physical force to ruin your life. If you're in the mood for a vampire film that plays more like a psychological trap than traditional horror, Daughters of Darkness leaves a lasting impression. The Shiver of the Vampires from 1971 is another female vampire film from a decade that produced quite a few with clear lesbian undertones running through it. Gene Rollin is not chasing big scares here. He is building a sealed-off little world out of castle ruins, candlelight, strange rituals, and people who seem completely detached from normal life. The setup is simple enough. A newlywed couple arrives at a remote estate, and it does not take long to realize the dead relatives in the house are not exactly staying dead. You get a vampire stepping out of a grandfather clock. That is one of Gene Rollin's signature images, and it tells people straight away this is not just another dusty Dracula copy. Then you get long, empty corridors, and that feeling that everybody on screen has already accepted how this night is going to end. Rollin was working with limited means, so he leans hard on location, atmosphere, and pacing. If you want vampire horror stripped down to mood, this is a solid late-night pick. And right now you can catch it on BFI Player and Amazon. The Blood-Spattered Bride starts like a romantic getaway, but quickly turns into something far stranger and darker. It's a hypnotic mix of gothic horror and surreal storytelling that builds toward a genuinely disturbing payoff. Director Vicente Aranda shot the film under strict government censorship in Spain. To keep the project financially alive, he secretly filmed two completely different cuts at the same time, sending the harsher version out to international markets. At first, it feels like a standard honeymoon story set inside a creepy old mansion. But the husband turns out to be deeply toxic, and the isolated young wife begins having violent visions of a dead woman buried somewhere on the property. What makes this one worth watching isn't fake bats on strings or guys running around in capes. It's watching the wife slowly realize she's trapped in a hostile marriage, then watching her align herself with something supernatural and start turning the tables. The film takes the old trope of the helpless female victim and flips it completely. What you get instead is a cold, unapologetic revenge story hiding inside a gothic nightmare. Nobody warned you a vampire film could look like this. The Hunger throws out the old Dracula image and replaces it with designer apartments, controlled performances, and a version of immortality that feels cold, vain, and quietly miserable. It turns vampirism into status, control, and the fear of aging. This was Tony Scott's first feature, and you can already see the visual precision he'd become known for. Every frame is deliberate. Nothing feels random. Catherine Deneuve plays Miriam with complete control. She never needs to force anything. She just takes over the room. David Bowie gives the film its sadder edge because beneath all that elegance, the story keeps circling decay, time, and what happens when beauty starts to slip. This isn't some old Dracula knockoff. It's a very early 80s vampire film built around image, desire, and the fear of losing control. Decades later, you can still see its fingerprints all over modern stylish horror. If you want a sleek late-night vampire watch, this one lands. Countess Dracula turns the real Elizabeth Bathory legend into something simple and unsettling. The whole idea is built around one cruel discovery. An aging noblewoman learns that bathing in the blood of young women can make her look young again. For a while it works. She walks back into court looking decades younger, catching the attention of people who never gave her a second glance before. Ingrid Pitt carries the whole thing. Half the film has her buried under heavy old age makeup, and she plays it with this tense, suspicious energy, like she knows the illusion could fall apart at any second. Aging terrifies people way more than monsters do, and Countess Dracula exploits that exact panic. Hammer Studio executives originally slapped a famous name on the poster to trick audiences into buying tickets, completely misunderstanding what actually made the script work. Most vampire pictures focus on the thrill of hunting victims. Here, the real enemy is the clock. Beneath the period costumes, the fight with the mirror feels desperately human. The Vampire Lovers takes the standard Hammer Studios gothic setup, then twists it into something colder, more intimate. By 1970, audiences were getting tired of the usual capes, castles, and crypts, so Hammer pushed the danger somewhere closer to home. Instead of graveyards or candlelit dungeons, the threat moves through wealthy houses and polite society. Ingrid Pitt makes the shift work. She doesn't play the vampire like some brooding figure lurking in the dark. She arrives as an innocent guest, slips comfortably into the household, then starts pulling people apart from the inside. Trust, seduction, plus upper-class manners become the tools. By the time anyone understands what she's doing, the damage is already done. Rather than chasing victims through graveyards, the film quietly turns the home itself into the danger zone. Most vampire stories live in darkness, but the Velvet Vampire moves the entire myth into the bright California desert. The sun-soaked setting gives the film a dreamy, surreal feel, making it one of the strangest entries in the genre. Producer Roger Corman just wanted a cheap drive-in exploitation flick so he could make a quick buck. Director Stephanie Rothman took that small budget out to the blistering Mojave and flipped the entire setup. She gives us a predator who drives a dune buggy and hunts her prey in broad daylight. The punishing heat physically exhausted the cast during filming. You can actually see that real sweat and fatigue right on the screen. Instead of helpless women running through gothic corridors, the male lead finds himself completely trapped and isolated in the blinding sand. Decades later, it still holds up as a rare piece of feminist exploitation that rewrote the usual nocturnal rules of vampire horror. A remote convent, 2 rebellious girls, and a religious order slowly losing control of the entire place. That's the setup behind Alucarda from 1977. A new orphan arrives at the isolated school and quickly bonds with the most unruly girl there. At first, it just feels like teenage rebellion pushing against strict religious rules. Then the supernatural side of the story creeps in, and everything starts sliding in a much darker direction. Director Juan Lopez Moctezuma doesn't ease into the horror. Once the possession angle kicks in, the film jumps straight into screaming exorcisms, frantic priests, terrified nuns, and fire tearing through the convent walls. The intensity keeps climbing the further the story goes. The film came out just a few years after The Exorcist in 1973, and it almost feels like a Mexican version pushed to the extreme. It wasn't a big hit originally, but horror fans discovered it later on VHS and festival circuits. If you want a 70s horror film where a convent completely loses control, Alucard is a memorable one. Female vampire pushes the myth into genuinely weird territory. Instead of fangs and bite marks, the predator drains her victims through pure physical contact. It's eerie, hypnotic, and unlike any horror picture you've probably seen. Lena Romay plays a totally blind bloodsucker wandering through ordinary coastal towns. She doesn't stalk people from the shadows of a crumbling castle or hide from the daylight. The whole movie carries a quiet, almost suffocating atmosphere. You don't get the standard jump scares or loud music cues here. Instead, you're locked into a slow, methodical pacing where a simple touch turns completely lethal. It strips away the capes and the bats, leaving you with a strangely intimate hunter. You spend the runtime watching her silently draw people in, totally subverting what a monster is supposed to act like. If you want a strange watch that ignores the standard Gothic playbook, this one delivers. Most vampire films stick to the same old Gothic playbook. Castles, coffins, a monster hiding somewhere in the dark. Vampyros Lesbos throws that whole image out and moves the myth into modern Europe. Beaches, nightclubs, empty coastal villas. The vampire isn't hiding in a crypt. She moves through normal life. The story follows a young lawyer who travels abroad to deal with an inheritance case and slowly falls under the influence of a mysterious aristocratic woman. Soledad Miranda plays the vampire with this calm, hypnotic presence. She doesn't chase anyone. She barely needs to try. People simply drift toward her. Jess Franco shot the film quickly and cheaply in Turkey, which gives the locations a strange sunlit feel that most vampire films never touch. Instead of building tension through plot, he leans into repetition, dream sequences, music, and atmosphere. The film actually opens with a surreal dream that sets the tone for everything that follows. The soundtrack became a big part of the film's reputation later on. Decades after release, the music was rediscovered by DJs and collectors and helped bring the film back into the spotlight. There's also the story behind Soledad Miranda herself. She became Jess Franco's breakout star during this run of films, and her incredible screen presence is a big part of why these movies still work today. But she died in a car accident at just 27, shortly after these films were released. Her sudden death meant these performances became her lasting legacy. Over the years, it turned into one of Jess Franco's most recognized films, a strange mix of vampire horror, dream imagery, and 70s exploitation style. Those are 10 vampire films that took Dracula somewhere stranger, darker, and far more interesting. If you want more forgotten horror, cult cinema, and wild movie picks like this, subscribe to VintageVerse and keep watching.